You are listening to Book Clips, a podcast where authors and narrators expose you to excerpts from different books. You can find the show and more by searching for The Lesbian Talk Show on iTunes, Podbean, or Stitcher.
This is a reading from The Long Past and Other Stories by Ginn Hale, read by Ginn Hale. This story is the hollow history of Professor Perfectus. It takes place a little bit later after The Long Past and features a stage magician with a secret and her very lovely assistant who also has a secret. The assistant, Gyula, has just recently gotten into contact with three very wealthy women who she's worked for before, named the Jewels, who could get Abril, the stage magician, in trouble. And this entire story takes place while the new United Americas exhibition in Chicago is going on. "What were the Jewels after you for?" I asked. "Well, it was Mrs. Palmer, who I'd worked for before," Gyula replied. But then she cut herself off as a group of men in musty fur coats strolled past us, loudly proclaiming their wonder and excitement over the machine made in the technology hall. Apparently the new automaton might well unburden men from the hysterics imposed by the fairer sex. Gyula scowled at the men, and I just smirked. They weren't such catches that any of the fairer sex was likely to impose anything on them other than a steep entry fee. 4 years back, Gyula returned to her story, leaning in close to me. Mrs. Palmer's favorite cook went missing. I tracked the woman down and managed to barter her back from Roger Plant. "I don't know who that is," I admitted. Most of the 5 months I'd been in Chicago, I'd worked here at the exhibition. I'd rarely even wandered far from the theater complexes. The one exhibit I'd convinced myself to pay the ticket price to enter had been The Wonders of the Western Territories. There they'd had towers of fruit from California, heaps of Nevada borax, and live specimens of beautiful feathered dinosaurs from the Colorado farms. Their plumes adorned a great many expensive hats worn by society ladies, I'd learned. What I knew of the city beyond the exhibition grounds came largely from the papers and gossip. I'd heard nothing of Roger Plant. "Nice for you, then." Gyula made a face like she recollected having a tooth pulled. "He runs a place called Under the Willow in the levee. His beer isn't worth the nickel he charges, but he pulls certain men in with the girls he keeps in his back rooms. Not all of them are there willingly. It took a little doing with my pistol, but I managed to convince him that the cook wasn't worth the trouble he'd bring down on his own head if he kept her." I stared at Gyula. I'd known she'd traveled in tough company, and had been more than an actress before I'd met her in the theater. But I hadn't quite imagined this. "So they want you to find someone again?" I asked. "They're offering $700, Gyula said quietly. I stared at her. That was more than I could have hoped to earn in 2 years, maybe even 3 years. I didn't doubt that the Jewels could afford as much, but I did wonder who they could value so highly, or who they feared crossing so badly. All around us, small electric lights lit up, like ornate constellations thrown across the exhibition buildings. 4 of them on the far wall formed a shining crown behind Gyula's head. "Miss Adams has a girl missing from her charity house." Gyula's expression went a little distant and hard. "Liz Gorky's the girl's name. She's 19, dark-haired and doe-eyed. She took work at a hotel called World's Fair, but hasn't returned for a week now. 7 days isn't so long, particularly not for a grown woman who's found work. Maybe she's had enough of living under the thumb of a bunch of nosy temperance women," I said. "I thought that too, but it turns out that she left her infant daughter in Mrs. Starr's care," Gyula went on, "and according to both Miss Adams and Miss Starr, Liz doted on her daughter and fretted over leaving her for even one afternoon. Neither of them believe she simply abandoned her child." I didn't see what Gyula or I could really do about the situation, but at the same time I wasn't entirely unmoved. I'd lost my parents quite young, and still wondered what they might have thought of me if they'd had the opportunity to know me. I couldn't keep from feeling sympathy for the child. "Have they gone to the police?" I asked. Plenty of missing folks turned up in their morgues. If she wasn't there, then the Jewels likely had the pull to get the citywide search started. It was more than Gyula or I could do for them. "Mrs. Starr went to them right away," Gyula said, "but they weren't much help. They questioned Liz Gorky's employer, a man named Herman Mudgett. He insisted that Liz had met a salesman and run off with him, which was good enough for the Crushers, apparently. But then 3 days ago, Mrs. Adams saw Liz Gorky here. So she ran off, but not very far, I asked. She wasn't attending the exhibition, Gyula whispered. She was an exhibit. What? I'm going to see her for myself. Gyula started to turn away, but glanced back at me over his shoulder. You coming?
This was an episode of Book Clips. Check out the show notes for more on this book. And it would be great if you would rate the show and subscribe to the Lesbian Talk Show podcast channel for more woman-centered content. If you are an author of lesbian fiction, then send us your reading. You can find out how on the lesbiantalkshow.com/reading.